I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello Horror Hounds, welcome to my horror house and welcome back to our ghost train ride through the portmanteau anthology horror films of Amicus Productions. We are at the penultimate film, Vault of Horror, directed by Roy Ward Baker and written once again by Amicus producer Milton Subotsky, who's taking inspiration once again from the horror comics of EC, Vault of Horror, and Tales from the Crypt. This is the Five Guys in a Lift one. Milton Subotsky, as far as the wraparound story is concerned, he's least bothered, should we put it that way. We see five guys getting into a lift. They're all dead, and the lift goes down further than they expect it to and opens up into a strange marbled room. They're all dead, with a seating area with drinks set out for them, and they go and sit round this table and have a drink and decide to each tell the story of the strange dream they had the previous night. They're all dead. And so just like that, we've got our excuse to tell each individual tale, but not before I was highly amused at the opening shot over the opening credits with all of our characters one by one entering the lift, this fatal lift, and imagining the poor stagehands outside having to scramble each time the lift door closes to change the picture on the wall, move the furniture around to make it look, each time the door slides open again, that the lift has gone to a different floor. Ladies and gentlemen behind the scenes, I salute you. The first story from these definitely all already dead people is called Midnight Mess, and it starts off a little mysteriously. A man has hired a private detective to track someone down, meets him clandestinely, and when he gets the location of that person, he kills the private detective. He's covering his tracks for some reason, and then goes to a strange, quaint little English village where a couple of people sort of doomily mention the fact that it's almost nighttime and he might want to get off the streets before they come out. It turns out it's his sister that he's been looking for, and she's played by Anna Massey. Her credits are far too long to go into. For our purposes here, she's in the wonderful Peeping Tom, which I urge all of you to watch. He knocks on the door and there's no answer, so he wanders over to a little restaurant across the road and spends a little time there and then goes back. And when you find out what he's actually there for, you do wonder, why have you twice gone into a restaurant, made yourself known, and let groups of people see you here at the site of this crime you want to commit? I'm sure good old Milton Subotsky would explain it all the way by going, they're all dreams. They don't have to make sense. Someone's recounting their dream. It's dream logic. Milton, you've got me there. But it is a little bit of a head scratcher. It's quite clearly a vampire tale. And the joy of it is not in working out that it's a vampire tale, but sort of trying to work out how it's going to be a vampire tale. And there's enough quasi-noirish bad behaviour and inheritance and murders to keep things chugging along until it gets to the vampire bit, and the vampire bit is jolly enough to be worth it by the time that you get there, ending as I noted in the Tales from the Crypt movie, an awful lot of these segments, which are adaptations of comic strips, end on a big visual splash, sort of final panel exclamation mark, and Midnight Mess is one of those. It's actually quite something, and I chuckled. I liked it. The next story is called The Neat Job and stars Terry Thomas, who was mostly known as a comic actor and Lowe. This segment is a comic segment, which is not at all unheard of in horror anthologies. Always tricky to get right. Comedy, probably even more than horror, is subjective, and while there will be a lot of people who like this segment and love just watching Terry Thomas be Terry Thomas, it doesn't work for me. It's another segment which ends on a visual image, a sort of visual punchline, as it were, but this one just seems to take too long getting to it. The first one, there are a few twists and turns, things were happening. Here, it's just the same thing, and then that thing underlined, and that thing underlined, and then that thing underlined again. We get it, I know. Get to the point. Terry Thomas is newly married. Up until this point had been a confirmed bachelor and likes things just so. There is a place for everything, and everything is in its place. Don't you dare touch his record collection or scratch the needle on his hi-fi. He's one of those guys, and his poor new wife can't catch a break. She can't do anything in precisely the way he wants it done. He's absolutely not willing to accommodate that he's now in married life, and things for him can't just continue exactly as they should be. And bless her, she's also a little bit clumsy. We get to a point where she spills something, makes a little bit of a mess, and in trying to clean that up causes more mess, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. Actually a nice little bit of sort of slapstick comedy. It's also a bit of a relief because something is happening and something is clearly building up to the point of why we're having this story told. It takes far too long to get there. It's kind of cute once we do get there. I like it, but the journey's not worth the destination for me. The third story is called This Trickle Kill Ya, and it follows a couple who are on holiday in India, and we learn that they are stage magicians. He's a magician and his wife is her assistant, but they both work together on the act, and they are exploring the markets of India, looking for magic tricks essentially to learn, exploit and take back to America as part of their new stage act. We join him as he pulls apart some guy who's trying to fake putting a boy in a basket and putting swords through it, and this sort of pompous Western magician tells everyone in the crowd how the trick is done. So this guy's livelihood is kind of ruined for the day, and his daughter notes him and she's going to take her revenge. This is a little bit of a throwback story. It does feel like something out of the earlier Pan books of horror, this post-colonial horror of the Westerner going out to one of the ex-colonies and falling afoul of the natives. What she does is she arranges for him to witness her performing the rope trick, and he can't work out how it's done and has to understand how it's done. So pays her quite a lot of money to come back to the hotel room to give him a private demonstration of it so that he and his wife can try and figure out how it's done, and ultimately they become so avaricious that they want to steal the trick. It's a nice little karmic story. As with an awful lot of these post-colonial type stories, the Westerner gets punished for their hubris and their arrogance and their actions, and so it is here. I will say this is the only segment which towards its end begins to feel dreamlike, considering all of these are supposed to be people recounting dreams that they've had. This is the only one that goes into a sort of dreamy territory, so I have to tip my hat to it for that. The fourth story is called Bargain in Death, and it's probably something you'll have seen in some form or another somewhere. It concerns a guy who agrees to fake his own death to collect his life insurance and arranges for himself to take a drug that will slow his breathing and heartbeat down to the point where he will look dead and allow himself to be buried alive, on the understanding that his partner in crime will dig him up at the allotted time. As with all of these kind of tales. There's crosses and double crosses, and he's running out of air. We also come across a couple of medical students living in the same digs as him who wants to start dabbling in digging up bodies to help them with their studies. So there's an awful lot of lives intersecting at this graveyard with this guy who's buried alive. It's quite a fun watch, and it's quite fun to see it unfold, but it's nothing that you won't really have seen in some form or another somewhere else. The real reason to watch Vault of Horror is the fifth and final segment called Drawn and Quartered, starring the fourth Doctor himself, Tom Baker. Tom Baker has undeniable charisma, undeniable screen presence, and to watch him in a role other than the Doctor, which he excelled at, is an absolute treat. He plays an impoverished artist working in Haiti. Voodoo ahoy, ladies and gentlemen. Where's that voodoo klaxon? He thinks that his work is worthless, but when a friend comes to visit him, he finds out that he's been screwed over. A cabal of art dealers and agents in the UK have combined to tell him his art is worth nothing, but then the art critic praises it fulsomely, and then the art dealers sell his paintings that they bought off him for a pittance for a handsome profit. And Tom Baker decides that the only good and right thing to do is go and see a voodoo magic man so that he can use the powers of voodoo to get his revenge on them. Voodoo in these movies is like the Swiss army knife of religions. It can do anything your particular story at that point in time needs to do. But for Drawn and Quartered, the voodoo infused revenge is really cool. I like it a lot. What happens is that anything that Tom Baker draws or paints acts as his own sort of personal voodoo doll, and what he does to that painting, if he does a portrait of someone, what he does to the portrait happens to them in real life. So he paints these portraits of these three people that wronged him on his return to the UK, bringing with him a self-portrait that he had finished after he made this bargain with the voodoo priest. So he has to keep his self-portrait very, very safe whilst he enacts his revenge on the portraits of the people who have wronged him. A sort of reverse picture of Dorian Gray, I suppose. It's a great segment. Watching the revenge play out and then watching the karma play out is brilliant. It's also got Denham Elliott in it, and he's great bang for your buck. I thoroughly loved it. Absolutely the best thing about the film, and really, to be perfectly honest, the only reason I would recommend watching this film to anyone. After they've all recounted their dreams, they get back in the lift, and then the doors close and then open on a graveyard that they all stumble out into. See, I told you they were all dead. And the film ends as most of the Milton Subotsky penned ones do, and some of the Robert Blocks, with a character turning to the screen and addressing the audience one last time. Oh, Milton, never change. I don't think it's going to trouble anyone's top spot in their rankings of these Amicus movies. The picture felt flat, the sets looked like sets. It never really has a cinematic feel to it, and when you've got bland surroundings like that, you have to take someone who is charged with as much energy as Tom Baker is to bring any sort of life to the screen. The vampire one with Anna Massey is pretty cute. I do like that. I like the finale to that. So maybe it tops and tails nicely. It ends really strongly. But apart from that, there's nothing really to write home about. Except for the fact that Vault of Horror paves the way for, in my personal opinion, my absolute favourite Amicus horror anthology. The last one they did, they went out on a high. It happens to be one of my all-time favourite horror anthologies. So please join me next time for one final hurrah for Amicus and From Beyond the Grave.